I was still in my running clothes when I pushed through the doors of the banquet hall. Sweat cooling against my back, my badge from the Marathon Med tent still clipped to my jacket. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor of the Royal York Ballroom, and a server near the coat check looked at me the way you look at someone who wandered in off the wrong street. I asked her which room the Hartley-Doyle wedding was in. She didn't answer right away. She just glanced toward the double doors at the end of the hall, and something about her face made my stomach drop before I'd taken another step. I pushed through those doors. The room was full, round tables dressed in white linen, candles burned halfway down, a string quartet packing up their instruments, like the ceremony part was already finished. My mother was near the back wall, one hand pressed flat against her chest. My Aunt Rosalind was dabbing at her eyes with a cocktail napkin, and up at the front, beside the officiant's table, stood the man I was supposed to marry in 20 minutes, next to my best friend, in a champagne-colored dress, holding a bouquet of white ranunculuses. The exact flower I'd asked her to carry as my maid of honor. The officiant was sliding papers into a folder. It was done. His mother turned and found me first, and she smiled at me, not warmly, the kind of smile you save for a moment you've been waiting years to enjoy. "Well," she said, "look who finally decided to show up." I turned toward the doors. My legs were moving before my brain caught up, and that's when I saw someone standing in the doorway who had no business being there, and everything that happened after that changed the entire shape of my life. But you need the whole thing first, from the beginning, or none of it will make sense. My name is Reagan Whitlock. I'm an ER physician at St. Michael's in downtown Toronto, the kind of hospital where you learn fast that nothing about a Saturday night is ever actually quiet. I grew up 2 hours north in a town called Bracebridge, the kind of place where the Canadian Tire parking lot doubles as a meeting spot, and everyone's mother knew everyone else's business before you got home to tell them yourself. I wasn't the popular kid. I was the one who stayed in during recess to finish reading whatever I'd brought from the library. The one who cried over a B- on a calculus test like it was the end of something important. I decided I wanted to be a doctor at 11. After my grandfather had a heart attack at our cottage, and I watched the paramedics work on him at our kitchen table, calm and exact, like they'd already decided he was going to live before they even started. I got into Western on a partial scholarship, and the rest came from OSAP loans I'm still paying down a decade later, the kind of debt that just becomes part of your monthly math, like rent or hydro, medical school, residency, 3 more years before I had my own patients, my own calls to make under fluorescent lights at 4 in the morning. By 34, I had a rhythm to my life that worked, even if it didn't look like anyone else's. I wasn't telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you because that job was the center of gravity for everything else, and it was also, if I'm honest, the reason 2 relationships before this one had quietly fallen apart. I met Callum Doyle at a Hospital Foundation fundraiser 18 months before the wedding. He worked in property development, the commercial side, office towers and mixed-use builds around the GTA. He had this calm, unhurried way about him that I found disarming. He brought me a sparkling water before I'd even asked for one, because he'd noticed I wasn't drinking. That was the moment. I thought, this one's different. We moved in together after 7 months into a 2-bedroom condo near Liberty Village that we split right down the middle, rent, groceries, the parking spot. I liked that he never made it weird the way some men did. When they found out what I made or noticed I had a TFSA that wasn't empty. He'd introduce me at parties as my partner, she's an ER doc, and there was real pride in his voice, not the kind men perform for an audience. His mother, Eleanor, was a different story from the first dinner. Eleanor Doyle was 66, a retired school principal from Oakville, who drove a white Lexus and had strong, specific opinions about everything from my work hours to the fact that I didn't host Thanksgiving. The first time I sat at her table, she looked at my hands, the short nails, the faint scar on my left index finger from a suturing mishap in residency, and said, "A woman with hands like that doesn't really have time for a family, does she?" Callum laughed it off. "She's old school," he'd say. "She's like that with everyone." But she wasn't like that with Sasha. Sasha Doran had been my closest friend since our second year at Western. We'd shared an apartment for 2 years, survived 4 exam seasons and a brutal breakup together, sat with each other through her mother's cancer treatment. She was warm and quick and the kind of person who made you feel like the only interesting one in a crowded room. She worked in commercial leasing, downtown, sharp suits, and a corner view she'd worked hard for. She was also, unfairly, beautiful in that effortless way that made strangers do a double take on the subway. I was happy for her, genuinely. I told her so more than once. Sasha and Callum met through me, obviously. Dozens of dinners and weekend trips and a long weekend at my parents' cottage that I now think about differently than I did at the time. I never thought twice about it. Looking back, there were things I should have noticed. The way she'd touch his forearm mid-law. The way he started texting her to check in on me during long shifts. The way Eleanor's whole face would change when Sasha walked in, calling her such a grounded girl, in a tone she never once used for me. Callum proposed on a Wednesday in our kitchen, no production, just him and a small box and a question I said yes to before he finished it. We set the wedding for the following September, the Royal York, 110 guests, the kind of wedding his mother wanted more than either of us did. But I'd let it happen because fighting Eleanor felt like more effort than it was worth. Sasha was my maid of honor. She came dress shopping with me, sat through 3 alteration appointments, organized the bachelorette weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake. She listened to me complain about seating charts for months. She was, by every visible measure, exactly who I thought she was. The week before the wedding, I picked up a case I could have handed to a colleague, but didn't. An 8-year-old boy named Theo came into the ER with what his parents thought was a bad stomach flu. It wasn't. A perforated appendix, early peritonitis, the kind of thing that turns into sepsis fast if you wait. I reviewed his scans at 11 at night and felt that particular cold clarity settle in that tells you there's only one right decision. Surgery had to happen before morning. I called Callum to tell him I might be cutting it close on the rehearsal dinner. He went quiet for a second, too long, before he said, "Okay, just make sure you're at the hotel by 2. The ceremony was at 4. 2 hours of buffer." I should have caught that pause. I didn't. The morning of the wedding, I was in the OR by 6. The surgery should have taken 90 minutes. It took closer to 4 hours because Theo's blood pressure crashed twice and we found a second site of infection the imaging hadn't shown. By the time I scrubbed out, it was past noon. I called Callum from the surgeon's lounge. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I texted. "Surgery went long. Emergency. Leaving now. Please wait. I love you. I'm coming." I drove from St. Michael's to the Royal York, still in my scrubs, hazards on the whole way, and made it into that ballroom at 4:18. 18 minutes late. Except, as I'd learned from my mother in the hallway, her voice shaking, Callum had moved the ceremony up to 3:30 at Eleanor's suggestion, because the officiant supposedly had another booking. It had started at 3:30. It had ended by 3:50. Sasha had been standing up there the entire time. I stood in that hallway with my ears ringing, and someone, I still don't know who, laughing softly somewhere behind me, and Eleanor walking toward me with that smile already in place. I turned for the door because I couldn't breathe in that room another second, and that's when I saw a man standing in the doorway I didn't recognize, holding a thick folder under one arm, looking at me like he'd been waiting specifically for me to walk out. His name was Detective Marcus Ferreira, and I'd never met him in my life. He had the unhurried calm of someone who'd walked into worse rooms than this one for a living. Late 40s, a Peel Regional Police badge clipped to his belt, reading glasses tucked into his shirt pocket. "Dr. Whitlock," he said. I nodded. My mouth had gone completely dry. "Detective Marcus Ferreira, Financial Crimes Unit. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Left messages at St. Michael's twice." Eleanor appeared at my elbow like she'd materialized from the carpet. "This is a private event," she said. "She isn't even part of the wedding party anymore, frankly." Detective Ferreira looked at her the way you look at a stop sign you're already planning to drive through. "Ma'am, I wasn't speaking to you." He turned back to me. "I need a few minutes." We stood in the corridor outside the ballroom, the carpet patterns swirling under the chandeliers, and he opened the folder. "How much do you know about Callum Doyle's financial situation?" he asked. "He's in commercial development, does well. We split everything on the condo. I never had a reason to look closer." "Did you know he was named in a civil fraud claim in Halton Region 2 years ago?" "No." "Did you know there's a judgment against him for $290,000 from a failed mixed-use project in Mississauga?" My legs went cold. "No." He laid out the documents, bank statements, court filings, and a name on an incorporation form I didn't recognize at first. A numbered company, Doyle Doran Holdings, Inc., and then I saw the second name behind the numbers. Doran, as in Sasha. "Doyle Doran Holdings was incorporated 16 months ago," he said. "Funded largely through transfers from a joint account opened last November." "Dr. Whitlock, did you co-sign any accounts with Mr. Doyle?" I remembered, suddenly, a stack of papers at a TD branch on King Street on a Saturday morning, Callum calling it refinancing paperwork on the condo, a pen already in my hand before I'd read the second page, me exhausted off a 36-hour stretch and trusting him completely. "I think I did," I said. "That account funded Doyle Doran Holdings. Over 11 months, roughly $112,000 moved through it. Your name's on it, which is why we needed to determine whether you were a participant or a victim." I gripped the wall. $112,000. Every extra shift, every weekend on call, every trip I'd skipped to put money toward a life I thought I was building with him. "Victim," I said. "Definitely the victim." "That's what I suspected," he said. "Mr. Doyle and Ms. Doran are about to be served civil subpoenas. That's why I'm here. I've coordinated with hotel security to do it now, while everyone's together." I looked back at the ballroom doors. I peeled my own thoughts into order, smoothed the front of my scrubs, and asked if I could walk back in with him. "You can stand in the doorway," he said. "Don't say anything till I'm finished." We walked in together, and the room went still in that cold, held-breath way. My mother's hand fell from her mouth. Aunt Rosalind froze mid-dab. Callum, standing near the officiant's table with Sasha's hand in his, saw the badge on Detective Ferreira's belt, and the color drained from his face so fast it looked almost medical. Sasha's eyes moved from me to the folder to the detective, and I watched the exact second she understood. Her grip on Callum's hand tightened. He let go of hers first. Eleanor stepped forward, still composed. "Who exactly are you?" "Detective Marcus Ferreira, Peel Regional Police." He pulled out the first document. "I have civil subpoenas for Callum James Doyle and Sasha Marie Doran related to an active financial fraud investigation into Doyle Doran Holdings, Inc." He held it out. "Mr. Doyle." Callum didn't move at first. He was looking at me, his face collapsing into an expression I'd never seen on him. Not guilt exactly, more like the look of a man who'd run the numbers carefully and just discovered he'd gotten the math wrong. "You need to take this," the detective said, not unkindly. Callum's hand was shaking when he did. Mims Doran. Sasha was still holding my white ranunculus when she took hers. It slipped through her fingers onto the carpet and she had to bend to pick it up. And when she straightened, her face had gone bright red. My Aunt Rosalind said, loud and clear from the back of the room, "Well, isn't that something?" I almost laughed. I didn't, but I almost did. Detective Ferreira handed me a card. "My office will call Monday. You'll want a lawyer." "I'll have one," I said. He walked out, and I stood there in my running clothes with my badge from the Marathon Med tent still clipped to my jacket, looking at Callum Doyle, who had moved the ceremony up 30 minutes so I'd miss it entirely, who had put my name on paperwork. I never properly read, who had built a numbered company with my best friend using money that was, in part, mine. I said exactly one thing. I hope she was worth it. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked to where my mother stood, and she put her arms around me, and I let myself feel all of it for about 10 seconds. The exhaustion, the humiliation, the grief for something I had genuinely believed in. Then I stepped back, squeezed her hand, and said, "I'm okay. Let's go." My aunt fell into step behind us. A few other guests, the ones who'd actually come for me, followed. We walked out of the Royal York together, and that was the last time I was ever in the same room as Callum Doyle. The weeks after weren't clean. I hired a family lawyer named Priscilla Adeyemi out of a firm on Bay Street, sharp and unbothered, the kind of woman who'd clearly seen every version of this story and stopped being surprised by any of them. She had my name pulled off the joint account within 48 hours, flagged the account history for the fraud unit, and got my victim status formally established in the file. Callum's lawyer called her back within 6 hours, which she told me afterward with a thin smile was the fastest response she'd gotten in 12 years of practice. The civil case took 8 months. I won't walk you through every motion. Living it once was enough, but by the end I'd recovered $78,000 of the $112,000. Not everything. Enough to matter. Doyle Doran Holdings collapsed under the weight of its own investors, 2 of whom filed separate suits of their own. The numbered company was dissolved by a court order that spring. Callum and Sasha, and yes, I'm aware of exactly how ironic this is, filed for divorce 5 months after their hotel ballroom wedding. I heard it through my Aunt Rosalind, who heard it from a woman in her curling league, whose niece worked at the same leasing firm Sasha used to. Apparently, the investigation did what nothing else could. I didn't feel sorry for either of them. I want to be honest about that. I didn't feel triumphant either, not really. Mostly, I felt tired. And then, slowly, something that started to feel like relief. Eleanor called me once, about 4 months after everything came apart. Tuesday night, 9 o'clock, my cell buzzing on the counter. I almost didn't answer. I did, because I wanted to hear what she had to say. "I didn't know about the money," she said. "I want you to know that." I was quiet for a second. "Eleanor, with respect, I don't think that's actually what you owe me an apology for." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she hung up. Theo went home from the hospital 9 days after his surgery, wearing a Raptors hoodie 2 sizes too big. A sticker shaped like a dinosaur stuck crookedly on his cheek. His dad shook my hand with both of his and couldn't get a full sentence out. His mom just said, "Thank you for staying." She meant the OR. But standing there in the hallway of the hospital where I'd spent the worst day of my life, I thought about how many ways those words actually applied. I stayed. I kept showing up at St. Michael's at 6 in the morning. I kept making calls that were sometimes wrong and sometimes right and always real, because that's the job. I moved out of the Liberty Village condo, let Callum keep it. I never wanted to look at that kitchen again, and found a 2-bedroom place in Leslieville with good light and a landlord who actually answers his phone. I got a dog, a scruffy 3-year-old terrier mix named Pepper, who has destroyed 2 pairs of running shoes and is completely worth it. I don't have a tidy conclusion about love or trust, or what it costs to be betrayed by people you chose on purpose. What I have is this: I saved a kid's life on the worst morning of my own, and I'd make that same call again without blinking. That tells me everything I need to know about who I actually am. I used to think my job made me hard to love, that I was too much of a doctor and not enough of a person. Callum implied it more than once. Eleanor said it outright. Even Sasha, once, after too much wine at a dinner I'd shown up 40 minutes late to, said, "Reagan, sometimes it feels like the hospital is your real relationship." Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. But on that September afternoon, when everything I thought I had fell apart in front of 110 guests, I was exactly where I was supposed to be earlier that morning. My hands did exactly what they were built to do, and a kid in a Raptors hoodie got to go home to his family. I'd take that trade every single time.